All right, so this is my official review on the Fuji GFX 50S Mark II. All right, so first up, let's talk about the build and design of the camera. So it's awesome that you get this camera body for this price, because this is the exact same camera body that you're going to be getting in the Fuji GFX 100S, which is a lot more expensive than this camera right here. This camera is going to cost you about $4,000. The fact that you are getting such a high quality body for a relatively inexpensive price is pretty awesome. So the camera body itself is about 2 pounds, which isn't too bad if you're comparing it to, older DSLR cameras, or even the newer mirrorless cameras from Nikon and Sony and Canon. The top display that you get on this camera is really awesome. It's got a built-in histogram if you want to set it to that, or you can just get your general camera settings, or these digital dials to show you your shutter speed and your ISO. But personally, I've enjoyed having the histogram right on top of the camera to make sure that I'm getting my exposure correct, or the way that I want it to be. As you guys know, if you've been following me on YouTube, I do shoot with Canon primarily, so I have the R5 and some RF lenses. And I was a little bit worried about this camera in terms of the size of the camera, because it is medium format, plus the size of the lenses. But I do have to say that it is pretty comparable to working with the Canon system. I would say it's just as portable. If you were taking into consideration size as a determining factor for picking up a medium format camera, I will say that this is very portable, way more portable than I thought it was going to be. This is definitely going to be a great option if you are going on hikes or backpacking and you want to get some nice landscape shots. Now, I actually want to show you the size comparison with the Canon mirrorless system. So I have the R right here because I'm filming on the R5, but the R and the R5 are about the same size, I would say. And the 85 1.2 RF lens on the Canon system, and on the Fuji 50S II, I have the 110. If we're talking about full frame equivalent lenses, that's about an 85 millimeter lens right there. So I definitely don't want this video to be about comparing the R5 or the R to the 50S Mark II, but I do think if you're watching this video, you would benefit from my own personal perspective of how I view this medium format camera. And to me, it's really surprising that if you're talking about the size of this medium format camera, it's really not too much different than what you get on this full frame system. So here's the two cameras. Let me try to get them in focus. And in terms of weight, they're really similar too. It feels like the GFX with the 110 might be a little bit heavier, but it's hard to tell. So again, if you were primarily going to be using this camera for travel or landscape photography, and you're going to be taking it backpacking, and you were worried about the medium format camera being too large, I would say that is a non-issue if you're talking about the 50S2 and the GF lenses. And we're talking about if you want like the ultimate image quality. Obviously you could go with a crop sensor camera like the X-T4 or one of the X Pro cameras and still get really great results. But if you're looking for the best image quality, then the 50S2 is definitely a great option. Both the electronic viewfinder and the rear LCD screen are high quality on this camera, so if you are needing to check your focus and you punch in 100%, you can definitely tell if you are getting accurate focus, and the results are really nice. So that's important too if you're in a portrait session and you want to show the photos to your clients on the back of the camera, having a nicer screen on the back of your camera is definitely a plus for that reason. I also enjoy how Fuji implemented the articulating screen on this camera. So while you're in a landscape view, you can flip the screen up and down like this, but you can also flip it like this if you have it in a vertical position. This is really nice to have to get those lower angles if you are in that portrait orientation. This camera does shoot video, and it has a dedicated video switch right here, which is nice. I didn't really use video too much. If you are shooting video, it would be nice as a supplementary camera, but keep in mind it only does HD video, so if you need more resolution than that, then you are out of luck with the 50S too. Another thing I love about this camera is that it has 6 custom positions on this dial right here, so you can save your custom profiles, like if you have a really nice black and white profile that you like to use. Personally, if I'm shooting JPEG, I love to use the classic chrome profiles. You know, all of these Fuji cameras really allow you to take those preset profiles and tweak them to really make them your own, and the fact that you can just kind of switch to that with the the turn of a dial is really helpful. In terms of sensor performance, the image quality that you get on the 50S2 is amazing. I know some people are hesitant because it's only 50 megapixels, and there is the GFX 100 series cameras that has 100 megapixels. But when you shoot with the 50 megapixel camera right here, it really makes you wonder who really needs 100 megapixels to work with. I know it's nice to have that extra flexibility with your files, but 50 megapixels is a lot, and if you're doing regular portrait work like family sessions, or if you're using this for even wedding portraiture, like engagement photo shoots, nothing that's too fast. I know your clients will not care if you are shooting with a 100 megapixel camera versus a 50 megapixel camera. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that for the majority of photographers out there, 50 megapixels is going to be plenty, and potentially overkill too. Compared to a full frame sensor, the sensor in the 50S2 is 1.7 times larger than those full frame sensors, and it's not an X-trans sensor that you find in some of the crop sensor cameras. It is a CMOS Bayer array sensor. If you go onto Fuji's website, they also talk about how on the sensor the micro lenses are designed in a specific way that will enhance the detail of your images. I don't know enough about the specifics of that topic to speak on that, but I will say that the images that you get from this camera are very detailed. Another benefit that you're going to be getting from shooting on a camera with a larger sensor like this is better low light performance and greater dynamic range if you are comparing it to a full frame sensor. Like I said, the images that you get from the sensor are absolutely amazing. With this camera, you also have up to 19 options for film simulations. So if you like to shoot in JPEG and you don't really care for editing your photos too much, then this is definitely a great option if you want a bunch of really nice profiles straight out of the camera. I was kind of going back and forth with the images that I was getting from my Canon R5 and this 50S2, and there's definitely a unique look that you get from this larger format sensor, but it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is. And also when you're changing lenses, the variance that you get from the characteristics of each lens makes it a little more challenging to pinpoint what exactly it is that looks different on the medium format camera versus a full frame camera. But I would say that one of the things I noticed was the transition from your subject or the in focus area to the out of focus areas is a lot nicer on this medium format camera. I think one of the biggest reasons to get the 50S2 is that it has excellent in-body image stabilization. For me personally, if I acquired this medium format camera, I know I would be using it a lot for landscape photography. There's a lot of times when you're on the trail and you might not necessarily have time to set up a tripod. So having a nice IBIS system in your camera is really practical, especially if you're trying to get nice sunrise or sunset shots. With this particular IBIS system, you get up to 6.5 stops of image stabilization. When I was testing how slow I could get the shutter speed shooting on the 50S2 with the 110mm lens, I could get down to 1/40th of a second and still get really sharp shots. I do think if I tried a little bit harder, I probably could have gotten it slower than that too. The IBIS system really came in handy when I was doing a portrait session indoors, and the room I was shooting in didn't have a lot of ambient light, and I wanted to keep my ISO levels down. I was definitely able to keep my shutter speed slower, keep my ISO down, and still keep my subject really sharp because of that IBIS system. And this is my first time shooting with a medium format camera, so I suspect that if I didn't have the IBIS system, I would have been struggling to get sharper shots. You know, just because I've been relying on it so much with the Canon R5, and that's kind of probably made me a little bit lazy to making sure that I'm using proper camera holding techniques to get sharper images. So, you know, having a larger sensor on the 50S2 is more problematic if you don't have IBIS. Because you have more detailed images and the sensor is larger, it's going to be more likely that you'll see the camera shake if it does happen. All right, let's talk about autofocus, which seems to be the hot topic with this particular camera because it is contrast-based detection autofocus. So, you know, naturally it's going to be slower than if you have a phase detection autofocus system. But perspective is really important when you're thinking about if this autofocus system is good or not, because you have to remember we are talking about a medium format camera. Even though it is a contrast-based autofocus detection system on this camera, the performance is still really good, and compared to medium format cameras that were released just a few years ago, it's excellent. If you're in a well-lit environment, the autofocus system is actually really fast. Not to mention you can turn on rapid autofocus in the menu system, which increases that speed even more. I think it might use up the battery a little bit faster. I'm not certain on that, but even if it does, it's definitely worth it. Now, I will say this, in low light environments, I did struggle a little bit using this autofocus system. It wasn't terrible, and I was actually pleasantly surprised when I was using iDetect autofocus when I was doing that portrait session in a low light room. The eye autofocus was really accurate. Now, the subject was standing still. If you were shooting a moving subject in a low light environment, then you definitely will have trouble doing that. Talking about low light performance and dynamic range, this camera does do very well, and I would expect it to because it does have a larger sensor. It is an older sensor. I was able to get up to ISO 6400 and still get really clean results. Anything above that, you definitely started to kind of see the image degrade a little bit, but the dynamic range that this camera offers is definitely going to allow you a lot of flexibility when you are manipulating these photos during the post-processing stage. So to kind of sum up this video and help you make a decision on whether this camera is for you, I would say the first thing to consider is the autofocus. If you are fine with a contrast-based autofocus detection system, then definitely consider getting this camera. So that's probably going to mean that you are doing more landscape or product photography or portrait work that doesn't require your subjects to be moving around. So I definitely wouldn't get it for family photography, and even for wedding work. I think that Fuji does advertise this camera as a camera that you could use for wedding work, but I would still say that it would be a secondary or sort of a specialty camera for your wedding work, maybe during like the couple's portraits or you know, family portraits where everyone's staying still. I definitely wouldn't use it as my primary camera because that would make me anxious on a wedding day. The price point that you can acquire this camera at is pretty ridiculous considering it is a medium format camera. Even compared to the Canon system I have, if I were to get a Canon R5, you know, a nice 85 1.2 and the 50 1.2, that's going to be more expensive than if I acquired the 50S2, the 110 and the 63 millimeter. So it's pretty cool that you can get into a medium format system for cheaper than a lot of full frame options that are out today. A big thing that I noticed when I was editing the Fuji RAW files was that the starting point for the files in terms of the dynamic range and the colors was way ahead of my Canon R5. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it took noticeably more work for me to get my R5 files to the point where I was happy with them compared to the GFX files. And I really didn't need to edit those files much at all to get them to where I needed them to be. The images definitely had a really natural look to them. If you get the 50S2, you're going to be really happy with the results. I would say that the 50S2 is geared towards photographers that have use for the flexibility that the RAW files give you. So if you need to be really precise with the composition, then those 50 megapixels and the amount of detail that this sensor captures is really going to help you with that. If you need to be really precise with your color grading, then there's a lot of flexibility with the files that this camera gives you. And in terms of the lighting in your pictures, the dynamic range that this camera offers is really great too. That's it for this review. If you guys have any questions about this camera, let me know in the comments section below. I was also thinking about doing a video about some of the R5 and GFX 50S2 comparisons that I found. So if you're interested in seeing that, let me know. All right, I'll talk to you guys later.